land, the man on the moon, 2/3 of the surface of our own planet remains unexplored. We know almost nothing about what lies beneath the surface of those vast oceans which gird the land on every hand. And the story of ocean, truly one of the strongest and most ancient of the Titans, points to the psychic growth and development of nearly all the peoples of the earth. Because different nations in different climates and under different conditions have had various experiences of the sea, the legendary and mythology is highly diversified. Yet wherever we have the rise of great cycles of myth, wherever the hero stories come down to us, they are some way related to the mystery of oceans. So first of all, let us try to sense something of what our remote ancestors thought about the sea. For out of their thinking has come much that has influenced our personal psychology of life. The old legends are gone, but the memories in our subconscious linger on. And probably will till the end of our times. The ocean was regarded as a great and wonderful mystery. The man walking along the shore of the sea followed the narrow path of his existence. On the one hand, the land which he had explored, which had become his habitation. And on the other hand, the sea, the very waves of which licked at his feet and seemed to be trying to pull him back into the ocean. So man existed on this little strip of land between the known and the unknown. The ocean was the unknown. It became the symbol of everything that was strange, incomprehensible, and thought. It was the source. Many things that man needed. It became part of his food supply. It became a road for his navigation. Yet with it all, he could only live on the surface of it. Therefore, in a mysterious and wonderful way, the ocean became a symbol of man himself, a creature that could live only on the surface of himself, a creature who, plunging into his own unknown, his own internal, fell into a psychosis from which he has never really recovered. Man does not dare to turn inward, for here is another universe, another world with its own peoples and its own existences. A world where he cannot live very easily because he is a creature of the air. He is an air breather. The sea is the home of the water breathers. Here at once we deserve to recognize the idea that there can only be one kind of being, ourselves, is shattered for the sea alone. But just as surely as we have come forth upon the land to become a creature of our own kind, so in the ocean there are creatures not like ourselves, with whom we cannot mingle, except for very brief incidents of time. Creatures in whose element we die. Creatures who, if they come into our element, will die. Thus we live on a planet not only divided to land and water, but a planet divided to two completely different kinds of existence. Two kinds that meet a little along the shores of things, but have found no common understanding. What is in the sea we do not know. Perhaps there dwell the last of the prehistoric monsters of other ages. For all we know, there may also be the first of creatures for another world to come. The Chinese are very philosophical people. Whose the sea is the symbol of the infinite. Lao Tzu declared that it was the abode of the great storm dragon. From the sea they rose, gathering up the waters into dark and twisting clouds. These dragons released their waters upon the mountains. The waters flowed into rivers and returned to the great cycle of existence. So man, some remote time, as scientifically we now know to be true, came forth from the sea. And how do we know that in the end he will not return to the sea? These mysteries are difficult to explain. But land is a minority part of the earth's surface. Man is a minority creature, even on his own planet. Then we wonder what might else lie under the sea. Is under the ocean the abode of lost continents, lost cities? Have nations vanished into the water? Are the keys to our own culture hidden secretly or deeply under the sea? Again, we do not know, but occasionally we bring forth some treasure from the waters. Some ancient sunken ship gives up its gold or silver or its jewels. We know so little about all these things that we cannot be surprised that our ancestors, without very much of the sophistication that we now boast about, were deeply moved by the whole mystery of the sea. Just as it divides us into two kinds of creatures, the very phenomenon of sea divides the earth into two kinds of people, those that live by the sea and those that live remote from it. And the psychology of these two groups is clearly defined. Those who have lived or came into being as nations or societies or cultures close to the sea are a different kind of people. First of all, they were born and bred in an atmosphere of mystery. The sea was always mysterious. Men could explore the mountains and the forests. They could even walk along the banks of small streams. The ocean, great. They could not see its other side. They did not know where the water ended or whether it went on to eternity. The Egyptians believed that the sun rode in a ship across the sky, run under the sea at night. Others believed that the world of the dead was under the sea. And here constantly arose the cries of lost souls. The salt of the sea was the tears of the dead. The constant motion of the sea was the reaching up of ghostly hands to clutch at the sides of ships or to cling desperately to the rocks along the shore. All these were strange grammars of human intention and human thought. Early in man's experience, he developed some way of using the sea as a road. At first, it was not a very important pathway. It was hollowed logs, or with some small ship or vessel made by his own ingenuity. He found that it was easier to travel along the shore than to penetrate into the more mountainous regions. There were storms upon the sea, but there were greater hardships upon the land. For on the land he must meet hostile tribes, the danger of wild beasts. Whereas on the sea he might, with a little sail, make much progress with less arduous endeavor. Because of this, merchants, adventurers, hunters, fisher people, missionaries, traders, all of these moved along the shores in their ships. And people near the shore were perhaps the first to become aware of the world outside their own local communities. It was to the people of the shore that wisdom came first, in the form of a stranger, and around him in turn were built numerous legends of sages and mysterious gods and godlings that rose out of the sea. Those living in more remote inland regions seemed to develop a different kind of mind. But to them, there was a certain rigidness of things. The cultures of the inland people were more introverted, more self-centered, more self-righteous, more self-conscious. For they had never come in direct contact with this wonderful living thing, the ocean. They had never seen an adversary greater than themselves. They had never come into the presence of a mystery so vast, so deep. The mountains were mysterious, but men could reach them. The sea was mysterious, but beneath its surface men could not reach. So the sea became forever the symbol of the unsolved. The Greeks gave the sea to the great deity Poseidon. They made him lord of the waters and gave him the right to challenge all navigation. The great challenge that he gave to Ulysses is so well set forth in Homer's poem. The terrible journey of Ulysses to his own far distant native land, harassed by the sea, endangered by the strange creatures along the shores and of the islands and rocky places, monsters that constantly attack his little ship. So the story of Ulysses is the story of a man of the sea going home. A story that has been repeated countless times in the factual history of mankind. The story of a man against the sea. The sea was the source of great pain to those who lived close to it. For the fisher people especially. The sea is the source of life and the cause of death. In the old days, when the men went forth to fish, the women and the children waited. Many a time the men did not come back. So there was great pain and loneliness. The sea was the graveyard of those who went forth to labor in its deep. And the seafaring man, frightened of the sea, yet bewitched by its mystery, assumes as matter of course that when the end of his time shall come, he will be buried at sea, as so many others have been. Thus the sea has had many meanings and many values to different people. In Buddhism, the sea has been likened to nirvana, the infinite reality, the strange, wonderful depth which has the laws of its own kind. And that of man which is human cannot live in the sea. And that which belongs to the sea cannot come to men. There is a strange wall dividing them, one from the other. A wall that you cannot see, a wall that is like the Shinto gate, a door from here to there, a door from something to something else, and no wall between. The sea, therefore, was not only the source of our physical existence as creatures, but the source of our spiritual existence, the great sea of life itself. The sea that was full of seeds of living things. The sea that was the great supplier of moisture, of water, that made everything fertile. The sea that was filled with monocellular organisms that gradually evolved and unfolded until some of these organisms came forth upon the earth to become men. All this mystery of the sea, and with so little equipment to labor with this mystery. Yet other peoples, even the Buddhists themselves, who made the sea the symbol of their ultimate and infinite condition, So in this also the mystery of illusion. The sea was like a vast mirror. The sea was a strange, uncertain thing, forever moving, never the same. It was something which moved, but also remained. But it was the symbol of transitoriness. For no drop of water in the sea that breaks upon the shore will ever break again. That drop of water is gone. The streams with their waters stand for men to watch, but the water is never twice the same. So the sea became to many people the restless motion of man himself, the never-to-be-quiet part of the human soul, drawn by the tides of fancy and illusion as the ocean by the moon. Man is never still, ever impatient, ever ambitious, ever breaking his own waves against the shores of the inevitable, always ending upon the rocks of ultimate dissolution. The sea, therefore, was a symbol of pain, a symbol of endless sorrow, a symbol of forever dyingness, a struggle against a reality that is so real or so wonderful that no vanity of man can assail it. The sea is the ever-changing in the midst of the never-changing. The sea is the agony of motion against the infinite quiet of eternal peace. Somehow this peace seems to be in the sky, the storm in the sea. Wherever we have had great spiritual leaders in the world, they have been close to the sea. They have been men of the sea. They have represented the various interpretations which have been given to it. Jesus speaking from a boat in the Sea of Galilee. Jesus walking on the waters, bidding the storm to be quiet, and the storm was still. Now, this is a mysterious symbol of the victory of consciousness over the uncertainties, the unrealities, the continuous tempests of the deep that rock men's souls from some strange secret source within themselves. Then we have old Daruma, the Zen monk, walking across the Sea of China on a tea leaf. We have the deity Kannan, rising in vision from the ocean to protect her worshipper. Kannan riding on a single petal of a lotus, quieting the storm. The same deity reaching forth her hand to stop the tempests that threaten the survival of her believers. Always deities have been close to the sea. Most of the great sages have used the sea in their parables and in their legends and in their stories. Many claim to have come from far places, from beyond the sea, to bring the light and truth and wisdom to mankind. Such was the feathered serpent of Mexico. Such also was the Chaldean Dagon rising from the ocean to become the lawgiver in the valley of the Euphrates. The great Fuhi rising from the Sea of China gave to these people their wisdom and their knowledge. So the seamen were very important. In the great Chinese Hindu cycle of things, the world always ends with a universal deluge. At the end, oblivion takes over, as in the story of the Ark of Noah. The tempests rise and the sea rises and the earth is covered. The good man in his little ship floats upon the surface of the deep, whereas in India, with the tow rope of his vessel held by the god Vishnu. Everywhere the sea has to do with the night of the gods, when oblivion falls upon the deep. The tree of life is gnawed through by the worms of mortality, as in the Nordic myths, and Yggdrasil, the great tree, falls into oblivion, into the great flaming ocean. All these legends show different reactions of man to the perpetual mystery of the unknown. It somehow has always been deeply is considered in terms of water. The holy water, the water of purification, the tank of purification in the Hindu temple and the Muslim mosque. All these things have to do with the mystery of seed, the mystery of purification, something to do with the mystery of origin and destiny, of life and of death. So in many different legends and myths and attitudes, we must finally come to the conclusion that in large, the sea has become a symbol of that part of man which is within himself and which he cannot reach, that part which he cannot understand. He fears to enter into himself lest he drown in his own introversion. He seems to feel it better to remain on the surface. And yet the mystics of old have told of a pearl of great price that was hid in the midst and depths of the sea. And the truth seeker who dived into the depths of the ocean to regain this priceless pearl and brought it to the surface again. Thus truth, wisdom, all man needs to know, including the secret of his own immortality, lies somewhere in the depths of ocean, the ocean of himself, the ocean of his own continually moving existence, this endless cycle of causes and effects which like tides and waves sweep on through space. All these different figures and symbols and emblems have a bearing upon our historic perspective, our philosophic perspective about ourselves and every other living thing. The islands of Yamato, the land of the dragonfly that we now call Japan, rise out of ocean. They are like a little scattering of land coming from the great sea. And it is said in the very beginning of things that God's caused a bridge to arise in the sky. And standing on this bridge, they reached down the point of a spear into the midst of ocean. And lifting up the spear, they found on the point of it a little mud that had come from the bottom of the ocean. And this mud they dropped on the surface of the water, and it became the islands of Japan. It was a very old story. It's found in the Kojiki, the record of ancient things. These islands really are almost like beautiful jewels set in a great ocean. The land area is small. There are thousands of islands, all lashed by the ocean or by one of the inland seas of this very water-bound empire. So these people would naturally be very close to the sea in their thinking. Whereas in Europe men used the sea to break through into other lands, for centuries the Japanese, following a still earlier Chinese custom, used the sea to keep strangers away. Somewhere long before this happened, the sea gained another formidable aspect. For across the sea could always come danger. Nearly anyone who was happy and peaceful and enjoying himself and minding his own business had to watch the sea, for his enemy might appear at any moment. If he had anything, someone could come out of the sea and take it. If his land was worth having, men from the sea would conquer it. And if he was not very watchful of his gods, men from the sea would bring other gods and destroy his. The sea was rather a dangerous thing. And China and Japan, both of them peoples of aloofness, and even Korea, which was for long called the Hermit Kingdom, they did not really want to be discovered. Some way they found their peace in their own strange, quiet world. And while we may say that this was politically, culturally, and socially frustrating, it was at the same time highly productive aesthetically and culturally, because it caused these people to do what so few larger powers have ever done, that is, evolve their own culture. They did not borrow it from 100 other sources. They took some from China, But they then began to work it over in their own way to produce a truly unique civilization. This would not have been possible had they been along a trade route for centuries. In any event, however, the Japanese people, as a group, loved the sea. To them, the sea was never as frightening as it was to many other people. Perhaps it was because their basic philosophy of life, certainly after they became Buddhists, was that all things are essentially good. And before they were Buddhists, they were Shintoists. And to the Shintoist, all nature is worthy of veneration. Ocean, sky, stars. All these are the great gods. And men should accept their edicts and learn to love and understand them. So while there are interesting and rather fantastic ghost stories about the sea in Japan, it was never the terribly formidable adversary that it was to some other countries. Because of the small land area and the immense population, even from the early times, the Japanese had to turn to the sea for food very, very strongly. For a long time, they were a fishing people. And even today, they depend very heavily upon the sea for the staples of life. Fish and rice have become more or less the standard diet of that nation for hundreds of years. Another thing that was rather important about them in their thinking was that while they fished, you very seldom find, or did find up to very recent times when Western sophistication took over, you very seldom found either a sportsman who fished or hunted. A few renegade daimyos occasionally had hunts to the disgust of the people, but for the most part, men did not hunt for pleasure, nor fish for pleasure. They hunted and fished only for the necessities of life, and all along their shores were monuments and shrines to the sea, and to the creatures that had given their lives that men might live. And they respected these creatures. They regretted the need to use them for food. But they were never unmindful, never thoughtless, never intentionally cruel in these matters. They only tried to find a means of survival for themselves and their families. So in a sense, the people understood the sea perhaps a little better than other nations. The one great exception, of course, to all this was the invasions of Japan from China, Korea, and the old wars of the regencies and the shogunates. Many of the great battles of these times were fought upon the sea, and to a measure it was assumed that these battles polluted the ocean and might be responsible for some of the comic trends that it possessed. Its tendency perhaps to turn upon man sometimes. The result, however, of all these wars and battles was that the Japanese believed that there was a kind of ghost that lives in the sea. The sea was filled with the restless souls of those who had died in ignorance. That all creatures, therefore, whether they had died in the wars of the Taira or the Heike, these who had died in the battle became the symbols of all human beings. The restless souls that had never solved the mystery of life, that had gone to sleep in confusion in their own existence, and were born to battle again against adversaries they neither understood nor really needed to fight. So the sea became a symbol of karma, of illusion, of the endless struggle of ghosts, both seeking power, both seeking wealth, both seeking influence. But all these things were but shadows, and in the end there were nothing but ghosts in the great sea of life. And there were other interesting and appealing thoughts. The sea, in a wonderful way, was associated with the ultimate abode of the dead. But here we have a curious combination of beliefs, some of which probably arose in Mongolian shamanism, some in ancient Shinto belief, perhaps some in Polynesian religious conviction. And even a few came from as far off as Persia to involve themselves in the philosophy and psychology of the people. So in the great feast of the dead, it is assumed that the ghosts will come back from the sea, that between this world and another, and the other is an ocean, some kind of an abyss of water, reminding us a little of the old hymn, One More River to Cross. But apparently the two most ancient peoples, this world was divided from the other by what the Greeks called an ocean of humidity, a kind of strange, heavy, watery atmosphere, a mist, a strange, etheric substance, a fluid or an energy, through which souls passed into the other life as crossing a sea, or into which they came in descending for rebirth or manifestation in this world. Perhaps this is why the ancient Christian church was formed in the shape of a ship, and why a certain part of the church is still called the nave, meaning a ship. Also, this is the mysterious ship of the doctrine, in which the deity Kannan conducts souls into the western paradise. The soul has to pass across this great expanse of ocean into another region or another kind of life. And in the ceremony of the annual return of the spirits of the dead, we see the ghosts coming from the sea. And at the end of the ceremony, we see the little ships with the lamps and candles, the little dishes of food and the memories to carry the souls back again. The little ships float down the streams to the sea and out to sea, like the ancient barges of the Vikings, until finally the little lamps go out one by one. The dead have returned to the land beyond the ocean to remain there for another year. All these legends, stories, have a message or meaning to us which is almost something to be grasped intuitively. It is something that tells us of a psychic dream experience, something that has archetypal dream meaning to us. And always it is the same, essentially. That the sea in some way becomes the symbol of an ignorance lying beyond this world and veiling from us the ultimate reality. The sea is our uncertainty. In uncertainty we live, and in uncertainty we die, but we pass into uncertainty. And all this changing, shifting picture of things that cannot ever be quite so seem to suggest the mirroring of the sea, the Maya of illusion, the symbol of water, the same Maya or Mara, however, which becomes the parent of prophets. For out of the uncertainties of life, man gains the courage to seek the realities. Now, there are many wonderful legends about the sea among the Japanese people. We want to say something at this time about Urashima Taro, the fisher boy. This is a story which could come from any one of 100 different nations. No one seems to know just where it originated. It is perhaps the oldest legend among the Japanese people. And yet it has passed through so many forms and variations that 100 plays could be built upon the versions of it. It returns and mingles and combines its forces with every other legend, practically, of the long sleepers that we have in the world, and they are countless. Urashima Taro was a fisher boy. And of course, in the legend, we are assured that all of the parts of the story are true. Wonderfully and inevitably true. We know they are true because our ancestors have told us these stories and have received them in turn from their ancestors, to the dawn of things. And when things come down for hundreds of generations, they must be true. No one knows where they started from. No one cares. They are part of a folklore, a great legendary. So because this young man, this fisherman, was a good, honorable person, he paid homage to the gods of the streams and the mountains. He was kind, but he was like the story we just mentioned. He and his family and his people depended upon the sea for life. So in his crazy little boat that bounced around on the waves, he was fishing quietly along when there was a very powerful tug on his fish line. And of course, a tug like that might mean a great fish which would be food for the whole village. So in great excitement, the fisherman pulled in on his line. But it soon became evident that he had not caught a fish at all. What he had caught instead was a great tortoise. Now this tortoise, of course, was a symbol of a great antiquity. In the Japanese form, the tortoise appears to be covered with a long fur. On the back of its shell, it seems to have a long beard. But this beard is really seaweed and other things that have grown to the shell. So the tortoise is very wise, for he is given the length of age of 1,000 years. And he is the sage of the sea. He is the wise man of ocean. He is the wise man of ocean because he has built from within himself his own protection, which is the great symbol of the truly wise. Furthermore, he is a man of prudence. For in danger he retires into himself until the danger passes. And this again is a sign of great erudition. So the tortoise is not just another member of the aquatic family. He is the great sage. He is the Ahat of the deep. And sometimes, according to ancient traditions, he may ascend to the estate of a bodhisattva. For there were bodhisattvas among the turtles. They were very wise and very noble and very great. Now, of course, our young fisherman was not entirely aware of all the esoteric possibilities of the turtle, but at least he said to himself, this creature is noble, and is very old, and very wise. Therefore, I do not wish to destroy it. So that instead of capturing the turtle and killing him, the young fisherman very carefully disengaged the hook from the turtle's mouth and released the creature, which disappeared over the side of the boat and back into the sea. And the young man baited his hook again, waiting hopefully for better luck. Well, the day was warm, and of course in all these stories there seems to come a kind of strange moment when things pass from realities to dreams. And according to the best information obtainable on this very recondite subject, there is no true report as to whether Urashima fell asleep or not. But he was certainly drowsy and dozy, and it was a warm day, and the boat was rocking pleasantly, and there were no fish, so that he was not much occupied. But anyway, while he was there, perhaps he was asleep. A very soft, melodious voice called his name, Urashima. And he looked around. There was no one in sight. So he sort of rested a little longer. The voice called his name again. This time he looked over the side of the boat, and there was his old friend, the turtle. And the turtle was now talking to him. And talking to him in good Japanese, I assume. Perhaps Chinese, who knows. But the turtle said to him, I came to test you, to see whether you were a good man or not, whether you obeyed the gods, whether you had a kindly heart. Because in our great world of the sea, Happiness is for those who are kindly. This is the abode of kindness. And we who are here do not have too much kindness for mortals. They care very little about us, but we appreciate someone who is thoughtful and kind, and we would very much like to reward you. And the young fisherman said, well, what is it that you would like to do for me? And the turtle now came alongside of his little boat, and the turtle had grown very large. And it was a very old and very wise old Ahat turtle. And he said to the young fisherman, climb on my shell, and I will take you to the other world. Well, it was the best offer that the fisherman had had that day, so he decided to try it. So he climbed very courageously and with considerable confidence, because this tortoise was most reassuring, out at the back of the great shell. In an instant he seemed to be flying across the sea. He was traveling faster than I could count or think, and the waves broke around him and broke over him. There was something very remarkable about it. His clothing never became wet. And he went on and on and on into a mysterious haze that seemed to rise on every hand. And here the story takes again two or more very interesting turns. According to one account of the story, the palace of the Sea King, for which they were bound, was deep in the depths of ocean, in some wonderful, strange spot, perhaps down far south of the present islands of Japan. According to another story, this palace was on an island in the midst of the sea. And you have your choice as to this particular solution. But we know, for example, that the name of the Dragon's King's palace was Rigoku, and that this has also, in Japanese, been gradually changed until it has become Ryukyu, which is the name of the Luchu Islands, a most famous to our memory now being the island of Okinawa. So perhaps this was the mysterious region to which the turtle was carrying our hero. But one report that came very immediate in this story, and of course, under the circumstances, we do not know just how the reports began to circulate, but anyway, this is it. That as they went further and further into this mysterious and wonderful region of the sea, they came to the place where all the seasons met. And this is a delightful fragment of ancient fantasy. For our young hero, looking in all directions, beheld a world in which all of the seasons came together and dwelt in peace. To the north of him flowed down the great snows and glaciers and frozen lands. To the south of him came forth and rose in glory the wonderful lands of summer, with flowers and trees and meadows and beautiful living things. To the east of him was the spring, with the cherry blossoms and the plum blossoms and the first flowers of spring. And to the west of him was the autumn, with the autumn leaves falling from the trees. And all of these regions came together to where he stood, and he was surrounded by all the glory of the seasons of the world. This particular little touch is more or less unique. We don't find anything quite parallel to it in the mythology of other peoples. Perhaps it arose from the extraordinary nature worship of the Japanese. They probably would regard a place where they could enjoy all four seasons at once as little less than paradise itself. When our young sailorman reached the shores of this magic land, whether it was down below the sea or in some strange island, there is this contradiction. The story says that the creatures of this place came forth to greet him. And according to one account, they were radiant and beautiful beings, bringing flowers and gifts and all kinds of wonderful things. And to another account, they were all creatures of the sea. And in these creatures, they were partly human, almost like mermaids and things of that nature. And they were dressed in ceremonial robes over their fishes' bodies, and they carried armfuls of the fruit and flowers of the sea. In any event, they were a very friendly and wonderful people. And through the intercession of the great tortoise and all these kindly people, a young fisherman was brought into the palace of the Sea King. Now, this was a palace such as the world had never seen before. A palace of glory and light and beauty. A palace in which everything sang and everything was filled with happiness. And whether it was beneath the sea, as one account tells, or in some pleasant, airy region, the story is essentially the same in spirit. Here everything was in fantasy. Everything was beyond any question of human limitation. Here was a world of universal happiness, a world of wonderful wisdom, ruled over by the great King of the Sea. Now, this King of the Sea had a ravishingly beautiful daughter. And here our story takes a romantic turn. Otohime was the daughter. And she was the most beautiful creature of the entire sea. Now, here it would look as though our story would be better when located on dry land, because it would be a little difficult to picture some of the accounts of this magnificent princess in her bridal robes and in all the glory of the court, resembling a highly costumed dolphin or something of that nature. So, but anyway, the story says that she was radiantly beautiful. And she was the one who had sent the great turtle out into the sea to test and seek for a suitable husband, because she wanted to find someone who belonged to the world of mortals. And she wanted to find the person who was kind and thoughtful and generous. And she had used the turtle to achieve her insight into the young man's disposition. Orishima was, of course, greatly pleased at the prospect of being adopted into the family. And he had no great objections to offer, so there were the wonderful nuptials in the great palace, and the young fisherman was united forever with the daughter of the Sea King. And the nuptials were finally consummated with the exchange of the 9 cups of sake. There was great banqueting, musicians, wonderful things happened. And the young man settled down to the joys of a world where the seasons always blend, where there is no night, where there is no sorrow, there is no death. We begin to sense something that resembles some of the other paradisical myths of the old world. We are in this mysterious phantom region of infinite delight, a delight perhaps like that of Eden's garden before the fall. Now, Urashima remained in this land for 3 years. And then there awakened in him the great longing to return to the human world. And it was a rather critical situation, because he left an old father and mother behind him. He did not know whether they knew he was alive or not. He had no way of knowing whether they were cared for. And slowly a strange melancholy settled in upon him. He had found that even paradise had its snake, as Omar says. Here was complete happiness, and he was not happy. He was not happy because, in a way, he was no longer with his own kind. He belonged to a world that he had not been born into. He was not a citizen of this wonderful land of Brevanus. He was a mortal, and his mortality hung heavily upon his immortality. He was not secure in his own consciousness. And Otohime, seeing the unhappiness in his eyes, asked him what was wrong. He said, I guess I'm just lonely. I'm lonely to see my earthly people, my parents, my brothers and sisters, my little village by the side of the sea, where we lived in simple lives and went out each day to find our food. In some way, something in my heart cries out to see these again. Yet I don't want to stay there. I will return. But I do want to see them once more. I just am not quite able to tear myself away from all that was my upbringing, all that was my childhood, the tradition of my people. And the beautiful bride was very understanding in this. She warned him that there was grave danger to him if he attempted this journey. But when he finally said, I can't help it, I must go, I have to go, I'm torn in such a way that my heart is so heavy that there is no happiness for me. Then she said to him, well, if you feel this way, I will arrange that you can return to your own people. But I'm going to give you something that you must swear to me that you will guard with your life and your honor. It is a lacquered box tied with a golden cord. And this box is your protection. But under no condition, at any time, must you open it. For if you open it, all is lost. But as long as you do not open it, you can return again to the land where the seasons come together. So again the sage old tortoise appeared out of the sea, and in a little while the fisherman was riding back with the speed of light across the ocean. And finally the tortoise brought him safely to the shore where his little village stood. And he got out off the back of the turtle, looked around him. And Urashima was troubled. Something was different. The Shinto temple was there on the hill. It was not in the same place. The little houses were different. The stream ran down to the water. And there were the boats of the fishermen, but the boats were different. And he went up the beach and went to the house of his parents. There was no house there. And he wandered about looking for familiar faces. There were no familiar faces. At last he went up to a very old man, and he said to him, is not this the town where Urashima came from? And the man said, yes, I think it is. But of course you know Urashima Taro has been dead for over 300 years. And he was lost at sea. And his grave is in the little cemetery there. There is where his memorial tablet is. And beside him are the graves of his parents, and the graves of his brothers and sisters, and of their children, and of their children's children. And there is no more any family of that name existing. And he asked all kinds of questions. And they all thought he was mad, because no one asked such questions anymore. They were themselves part of legend and lore of centuries before. He went to the Shinto temple, but the priest was not the same, and the priest did not understand. Nobody understood. The whole world that he had known was gone. So, lonely still, and more or less despairing, Urashima Taro went down to the edge of the water and stood looking out at the sea. For now he had a vague uncertainty, fear, and almost terror within himself. There was nothing any longer to keep him among the worlds of men. how should he get back again to that wonderful palace of the Sea King? He did not know. He called to the sea. Nothing happened. He looked hopefully for the great turtle, but he saw no sign of it. He wandered dejectedly along the shore of the sea. And finally, he held the little box in his hand with its silken cord. He said, I know I'm sworn not to open this, but I no longer have any other course. I do not know what to do. Perhaps if I open this, I will find a way back again to the palace of the Sea King. And so, breaking his promise, he lifted off the lid of the box. And out of the box there came a fine white mist. There was nothing else in the box. And this mist floated and hovered and remained a little time in the air and then drifted out over the sea and disappeared. And in that instant, the young fisherman knew all was lost. But suddenly, in a second, his body began to age. In a very few minutes, he was so old that he could no longer stand. He fell upon the ground, and in a few moments, he was dead. But suddenly, without warning, he had become as though 300 years old. And the people there have a little temple built to his memory now. It's been shown to visitors many times. And in this temple is the empty box with its golden cord and two strange stones that he is said to have brought back with him from the land where the seasons mingle. And no one else then knows anything more about what happened to the fisherman. He just died and was buried again, but now as an unknown, aged man in the village where he was born. This is the story of the palace of the Sea King. And let's see what happens if we try to investigate the story a little bit, see what it all means to us. Some of it is evidently devised from Shinto fables. The story of the long sleeper, our Rip Van Winkle story, comes from another version that is in China and which has been held there for a very long time. Here is the story of the individual who passes through a dream or a vision, like the seven sleepers of Ephesus, remains in a trance or in a strange suspended state of animation for a long time, and then comes back to find the world he knew no longer exists. This legend is practically everywhere on Earth. There's a very interesting version of it among the Eskimos. So this is not new in itself. But the patterning of it altogether seems to suggest several things. And Buddhist priests in Japan have found the story very supporting to some of their own doctrines and beliefs. Let us imagine for a moment that the mysterious abode of the Sea King represents in man the mysterious seat of his own existence. That this palace of the Sea King, where all the seasons meet, is the abode where all the sensory perceptions combine. Here all phenomena, all things that have to do with the world, have a sort of common meeting ground. And this palace of the Sea King is the strange center of self-consciousness that we call I, that is located deep within the recesses of our natures and dispositions.